The diner was nearly empty that afternoon, just a few scattered customers sipping coffee or picking at their meals. The old veteran sat alone in a corner booth, his worn-out cap resting on the table. His face carried the weight of years, deep lines, tired eyes, but still a quiet strength. He had seen things most people couldn't imagine, fought battles that left scars both inside and out. He had come in for a simple meal, something warm to fill his stomach. The waitress, a young woman with a sharp tone, barely glanced at him when he walked in. He didn't mind. He was used to being overlooked. He ordered coffee and a sandwich, his voice rough but polite. She scribbled it down without a word and walked off. Minutes passed. Then 10 more. His coffee never came. He caught her eye once, but she turned away, chatting with another server near the kitchen. He waited, patient as always. Soldiers learned patience. But when another group walked in, laughing, well-dressed, she hurried over immediately, smiling, pen ready. The veteran sat there, forgotten. He didn't make a scene. He just watched, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. Maybe it was his faded jacket, his rough hands. Maybe she thought he couldn't afford the meal. Whatever the reason, he was invisible. Then the door chimed again. This time, the sound was different, boots on the floor, a familiar rhythm. The veteran's head lifted slightly. A group of men and women walked in, all in uniform, their postures straight, their faces serious. The diner fell quiet. The waitress froze mid-sentence. The soldiers scanned the room, then their eyes landed on the old man in the corner. Without a word, they moved toward him, their boots echoing. One pulled out the chair beside him. Another stood at his back. A third placed a hand on his shoulder. The message was clear. The waitress's face paled. The veteran just leaned back, his expression unreadable. And then, in a voice that carried across the silent diner, one of the soldiers spoke. "We'll take whatever he's having." The air in the diner grew thick with tension. The waitress stood frozen, her pen hovering over her notepad. The other customers had stopped eating, their eyes darting between the veteran and the soldiers now surrounding him. No one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the neon sign flickering outside. The veteran didn't smile. He didn't glare. He just sat there, calm as ever, as if this was exactly how he expected his day to go. One of the soldiers, a tall man with a stern face, leaned slightly toward the waitress. His voice was firm but controlled. "You forgot his coffee." It wasn't a question. The waitress swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around her notepad. For a second, it looked like she might argue, but then her shoulders slumped. She turned on her heel and hurried toward the kitchen. The soldiers didn't move. They stood like a wall around the veteran, their presence alone speaking louder than any words. The message was clear: this man will not be ignored. A few seconds later, the waitress returned, a steaming cup in her shaking hands. She placed it carefully in front of the veteran, avoiding his eyes. "Sorry," she muttered. The veteran gave a small nod but said nothing. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug, the heat seeping into his rough skin. The soldiers finally took their seats around him, their uniforms crisp, their expressions unreadable. At another table, a man in a business suit cleared his throat. "Hey, thank you for your service," he said awkwardly, nodding toward the group. The soldiers didn't respond. The veteran just took a slow sip of his coffee. The waitress, now flustered, pulled out her notepad again. What can I get for you all?" Her voice was softer now, almost hesitant. The same soldier who had spoken earlier looked at her. "Same as him. All of us." She nodded quickly and scurried off. The diner stayed quiet, the usual clatter of plates and casual chatter replaced by an uneasy silence. The other customers exchanged glances, some curious, some guilty, some just unsure what to do. A teenage boy at the counter pulled out his phone, as if debating whether to record the moment, but a sharp look from one of the soldiers made him think twice. He slipped it back into his pocket. Behind the counter, the cook peeked through the kitchen window, his eyebrows raised. He had seen plenty of things in his years working there, but nothing like this. The veteran finally spoke, his voice low. "You didn't have to do this." The soldier beside him shook his head. "Yeah. We did." No more words were needed. The waitress returned soon after, balancing a tray of sandwiches and more coffee. This time, she served the veteran first. The waitress set the plates down carefully, her hands steadier now but her eyes still avoiding direct contact. The veteran gave her another small nod, no anger, no gloating, just quiet acknowledgement. She hesitated, like she wanted to say something else, but instead turned and walked away, her shoulders tense. At the other tables, whispers started. A middle-aged woman leaned toward her friend. "Did you see how they just stood up for him like that?" Her friend nodded, eyes wide. A man in a trucker cap shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly very interested in his half-eaten pie. The soldiers ate in silence, the kind of comfortable quiet that only comes from people who have shared hardship. Every now and then, one of them would glance at the veteran, checking on him without words. He noticed, of course. He always did. Near the counter, the teenage boy who had almost filmed the scene earlier kept sneaking glances at them. Finally, he gathered his courage and stood up, walking over with hesitant steps. One of the soldiers looked up, eyebrows raised. My granddad was in the army," the kid blurted out. Thanks. For what you guys did." The veteran studied him for a second, then gave a slow, approving nod. The soldier closest to the kid reached out and clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "You're all right, kid." The boy grinned, relief flashing across his face, and hurried back to his seat, standing a little taller. Meanwhile, the waitress had retreated behind the counter, gripping the edge like she needed the support. The older cook, a gruff man with a tattoo of an anchor on his forearm, leaned toward her. "You messed up, girl," he muttered. "I didn't know," she started, defensive. "Doesn't matter if you knew or not," he interrupted. "You see an old man alone, you treat him right. Simple as that." She didn't argue. Just stared down at her shoes, jaw tight. Outside, the sky had started to darken, the neon diner sign casting a red glow over the booths. The veteran wiped his mouth with a napkin and pushed his plate away slightly. The soldiers around him mirrored the movement, as if they were all still following unspoken orders. One of them, a woman with a sharp gaze, finally broke the silence. "You good?" she asked the veteran. He took a slow breath. "Yeah. Better now." She smirked, just a little. "Figured you might be." At the register, the waitress was ringing up another customer, her voice polite but hollow. When the veteran and the soldiers stood to leave, she flinched slightly, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. The veteran walked up to the counter first. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, but the soldier behind him stopped him with a hand on his arm. "We got it." The waitress opened her mouth, then closed it. It's on the house," she managed to say. The veteran studied her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No. We pay our way." He laid down exact change, not a penny more, not a penny less, and turned toward the door. The soldiers followed, boots thudding softly against the linoleum. No one in the diner spoke as they left. The bell above the door jingled. And just like that, they were gone. The door swung shut behind them, leaving the diner in heavy silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then, like a spell had broken, the remaining customers erupted into hushed conversation. The waitress stood frozen at the register, staring at the exact change the veteran had left. Her throat felt tight. The cook sighed loudly from the kitchen window, shaking his head before disappearing back into the steam. At a corner table, the woman who had whispered earlier turned to her friend. "That was something else. Did you see the way those soldiers surrounded him? Like they'd been waiting for this moment for years." Her friend nodded, stirring her coffee absently. "Makes you wonder how often that old guy gets treated like that when no one's around to see it." Near the window, the teenage boy was still watching the door, his fries forgotten. His phone buzzed, probably one of his friends texting, but he didn't reach for it. Something about what he'd just witnessed stuck with him in a way he couldn't explain. Behind the counter, the waitress finally let out a shaky breath and started clearing the soldier's table. As she stacked the plates, she noticed something: one of them had left their cap behind. It was worn, the fabric faded, with a small insignia on the front. She picked it up, running her thumb over the stitching. The cook reappeared, wiping his hands on his apron. "You gonna just stand there holding that, or you gonna do something about it?" She glared at him. "What am I supposed to do? Chase them down the street?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe you sit with the fact that you judged a man before he even opened his mouth." Her face burned, but she didn't snap back this time. Instead, she tucked the cap under the counter, next to the lost and found box where forgotten gloves and scarves usually ended up. But this felt different. This wasn't just something left behind, it felt like a message. Outside, the street was quiet. The veteran and the soldiers were already out of sight, swallowed by the evening shadows. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, the group walked in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. The veteran's steps were slower than the others, but no one rushed him. After a few minutes, they reached a small park with a bench overlooking a scraggly patch of grass. The tall soldier, the one who'd spoken first in the diner, pulled out a cigarette and offered one to the veteran. He took it with a grunt of thanks. "Haven't changed much, have you?" the soldier said, lighting his own cigarette. "Still letting crap roll off your back like it's nothing." The veteran exhaled smoke, watching it curl into the darkening sky. "Not worth the energy." The female soldier snorted. "Bull. It's always worth it. That's why we showed up." A pause. Then the veteran chuckled, a low, rough sound. "You always were a pain in my ass, Corporal." She grinned. "And you're welcome for it, Sarge." For a while, they just sat there, passing a flask between them, the city noises fading into background static. No one brought up the diner again. They didn't need to. Back at the diner, the waitress wiped down the same spot on the counter for the 5th time, her mind racing. The cap under the counter seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Finally, she grabbed her jacket. "Where you going?" the cook called after her. "Air," she muttered. Outside, the night air was cool. She leaned against the brick wall, pressing her palms to her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt ashamed. A car passed, its headlights sweeping over the sidewalk, and for a second, she thought she saw a figure standing across the street. An old man in a worn jacket. But when she looked again, the street was empty. The waitress stood frozen on the sidewalk, the cold night air biting through her thin jacket. That shadowy figure, had it really been the veteran? Or just her guilt playing tricks? She rubbed her arms, suddenly aware of how quiet the street had become. Back inside, the diner was nearly empty now. The cook gave her a long look as she returned but said nothing. She moved mechanically, refilling salt shakers and wiping tables, her mind elsewhere. Under the counter, the forgotten cap seemed to pulse with unspoken history. Across town, the veteran walked alone down a dimly lit street, hands in his pockets. The soldiers had offered to drive him home, but he'd refused. He needed the walk, needed the time to think. The encounter at the diner hadn't surprised him. He'd spent years becoming invisible to the world, a ghost in plain sight. But those kids, his old unit, showing up like that? That was something else. A flicker of movement caught his eye. A stray dog limped out from behind a dumpster, ribs visible under its matted fur. It eyed him warily but didn't run. The veteran crouched slowly, making a soft clicking sound with his tongue. "Hey there, soldier." The dog's tail gave a tentative wag. Back at the diner. The waitress couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed the cap from under the counter and shoved it into her bag. "I'm clocking out early," she told the cook. He raised an eyebrow but just nodded. "About damn time." Outside, she didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. The weight in her bag felt like a confession. The veteran's path. He sat on the curb now, the stray dog tentatively licking crumbs from his palm. From his pocket, he pulled out a battered photo, a much younger version of himself surrounded by grinning soldiers in dusty uniforms. The same ones who'd walked into that diner today. The dog whined softly, nosing at his knee. "Yeah, I know," he murmured. Stupid old man getting sentimental. But when he stood to leave, the dog followed. The waitress's search. She found herself outside a rundown VFW hall, the cap clutched in her hands. Music and laughter spilled from inside. Through the window, she could see the soldiers from the diner, relaxed now, drinks in hand, the tall one telling a story that made the others roar with laughter. But no sign of the veteran. Her chest tightened. What was she even doing here? She turned to leave. And nearly walked right into him. The veteran stood before her, the stray dog at his heels. Up close, she could see the network of scars on his hands, the deep lines around his eyes. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then she held out the cap. "You left this." He took it slowly, turning it over in his hands. "Figured someone might bring it by." The dog sniffed her shoes. Somewhere behind them, the VFW door burst open, spilling light and noise into the parking lot. The female soldier paused mid-laugh, spotting them. "Well, I'll be damned," she said. "Sarge, you making friends out here?" The veteran didn't smile. But his eyes, for the first time all day, weren't quite so tired. The laughter from the VFW hall spilled into the night as the female soldier propped the door open with her boot. "You two coming in or what?" she called, her breath visible in the cold air. The waitress hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She hadn't planned this far ahead. The veteran studied her face for a long moment before turning to his former corporal. "Give us a minute." As the door swung shut, an awkward silence settled between them. The stray dog pressed against the veteran's leg, watching the waitress with wary eyes. She could feel her pulse in her throat as she struggled to find the right words. I just wanted to apologize," he finished for her, his voice quieter than she expected. "You already did." She shook her head. "Not properly. Not in a way that matters." A shout of laughter erupted from inside the hall, followed by the clinking of glasses. The veteran absently scratched behind the dog's ears. "That mutt there," he said suddenly. "Been following me since I left the diner. Won't take food, just walks beside me like he's on some damn mission." The waitress blinked at the sudden change of subject. The dog's ribs still showed through its patchy fur, but its tail gave a slow wag when she met its gaze. "You remind me of him," the veteran continued. All stubborn pride and skittish energy. A surprised laugh escaped her lips. "That's the worst apology acceptance I've ever heard." For the first time, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Wasn't trying to accept anything. Just stating facts. The door banged open again, this time revealing the tall soldier holding two foaming beers. "Christ on a cracker, it's freezing out here. Either come in or stop blocking the damn doorway." The veteran sighed but reached for one of the beers. As he turned back toward the hall, he paused just long enough to say over his shoulder, "Your call, kid." The waitress stood frozen as the door swung shut behind him, leaving her alone with the stray dog. It cocked its head at her, one ear flopping sideways. Inside, through the smudged window, she could see the veteran being swallowed by a crowd of uniforms and laughter. Someone clapped him on the back hard enough to make him spill his beer, and the resulting roar of laughter shook the walls. Her fingers found the dog's matted fur without thinking. "Well," she murmured. "What do you think I should do?" The dog licked her hand once before trotting to the door and scratching at it insistently. Taking a deep breath, she followed. Inside the VFW hall. The warmth hit her first, a thick, beer-scented heat that wrapped around her like a blanket. Then the noise, stories being shouted over each other, a jukebox playing classic rock slightly off-key, the sharp crack of pool balls colliding. No one noticed her at first. She hovered near the entrance, watching as the veteran was pulled into what appeared to be a heated debate about baseball. The stray dog pressed against her legs like a living security blanket. Then the female soldier spotted her. "Well, look who grew a spine," she called, raising her drink. A few heads turned. Conversations stuttered. The veteran didn't look up from his beer, but the waitress saw his shoulders tense. The tall soldier broke the awkward silence by shoving a drink into her hands. "House rules," he announced. "No one drinks alone here." The glass was cold in her fingers. Around her, the conversation slowly resumed, though she could feel eyes still darting her way. The dog settled at her feet with a contented sigh. "You named him yet?" She turned to find the veteran beside her, studying the dog with something close to affection. "Me? He's your shadow," she pointed out. He grunted. "Temporary arrangement." The jukebox switched to an old country song she vaguely recognized. Someone cheered. The female soldier materialized with a plate of nachos. "Eat," she ordered, shoving it at the waitress. "You look like you're about to bolt." And suddenly, impossibly, she was laughing. Really laughing, for the first time in months. The veteran shook his head but didn't walk away. The dog thumped its tail against the sticky floor. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. But in that crowded, noisy hall, surrounded by people who had every reason to hate her, the waitress realized something surprising. She felt warm. The jukebox cycled through 3 more songs before the waitress realized her drink was empty. The veterans' unit had absorbed her into their circle like she'd always been there, passing her plates of half-eaten bar food and refilling her glass before she could protest. The female soldier, who'd introduced herself as just Diaz, leaned across the sticky table. "So what's your deal, diner girl? You always chase down customers after work?" The question should have stung, but Diaz's smirk took the edge off. The waitress swirled the ice in her glass. "Guess I owed someone a proper apology." At the other end of the table, the veteran was deep in conversation with the tall soldier, their heads bent together over a faded photograph. The stray dog had claimed a spot between his boots, snoring softly. Diaz followed her gaze. "He'd kill me for telling you this," she said, voice dropping, "but that man saved every single ass at this table at least once." She tapped a scar on her forearm. "Took shrapnel dragging my unconscious self through a damn minefield." The waitress's stomach twisted. The veteran looked so ordinary now, arguing about baseball with mustard on his sleeve. A sudden burst of laughter erupted from the pool table. One of the younger soldiers, couldn't be older than 25, was demonstrating what appeared to be an extremely inappropriate dance move. The veteran groaned and covered his eyes. "Kids these days, right?" Diaz grinned, elbowing the waitress. "Bet your diner sees worse." For the first time all night, the waitress felt her shoulders relax. "You'd be surprised what people try to do in booths at 2 a.m. Diaz nearly spat out her drink. "No shit? Tell me everything." 2 hours later. The crowd had thinned, but the stories kept coming. The waitress learned about the time the unit had rigged a makeshift shower in the desert using a water barrel and duct tape. Sarge threatened to court-martial us until he tried it himself. About the veteran's legendary poker face, man bluffed with a pair of 2s and won a month's pay. The stray dog had migrated to her feet at some point, its chin resting on her shoe. She absently scratched behind its ears as the veteran finally slid into the chair beside her. Getting along with the mutt, I see, he observed. She smiled without thinking. He's got better manners than some of your unit. Across the room, someone was attempting to balance a spoon on their nose while the others placed bets. The veteran sighed. Used to be an elite fighting force. The waitress studied his profile, the way his eyes tracked each of his soldiers even as he pretended to be annoyed. You miss it, she realized aloud. He didn't answer at first. Then, so quiet she almost missed it, miss knowing where I belong. The jukebox switched to a slow ballad. The dog sighed in its sleep. Diaz appeared suddenly, slapping both hands on their table. Okay, moment's over. Sarge, Martinez bet $50 you can't still do that trick with the coin. The veteran's eyebrows shot up. That idiot never learns. He pushed back his chair, but paused just long enough to glance at the waitress. You sticking around? She found herself nodding before she'd fully decided. As he walked away, Diaz winked at her. Told you he was soft. Outside, the first hints of dawn painted the sky gray. The waitress realized with a start that she'd been there all night, and stranger still, that she didn't regret a single minute. The first rays of morning light were bleeding through the VFW hall's dusty windows when the waitress finally checked her phone. 6 missed calls from the diner's owner. She should have felt panic, but all she could muster was a quiet acceptance as she slid the phone back into her pocket. Across the room, the veteran was demonstrating his infamous coin trick to a circle of groggy but impressed soldiers. The stray dog, now decisively attached to him, watched with what could only be described as canine pride. Diaz slumped into the chair beside her, smelling of beer and nostalgia. So, she said, popping the last mozzarella stick into her mouth, you fired yet? The waitress snorted. Probably. Worth it? She watched as the veteran made a quarter vanish into thin air, provoking a chorus of exaggerated groans. The dog barked once, tail thumping. Yeah, she admitted. Worth it. An hour later. The goodbyes took forever. Soldiers clapped each other on the back, made vague promises to meet up again soon, exchanged numbers they'd probably never call. The veteran stood slightly apart, letting the chaos swirl around him. The waitress approached hesitantly, the stray dog trotting between them like a fuzzy mediator. So, she began, then faltered. What did you say after a night like this? The veteran solved the problem for her. You got a place to be? She blinked. Besides unemployed? He nodded toward the dog. This one needs a vet. And breakfast. A pause. Could use an extra pair of hands. The dog chose that moment to lick her fingers, its tail wagging hopefully. Diaz, passing by with her duffel bag, smirked. Careful, Sarge. Starting to sound like you enjoy company. He flipped her off without heat. At the vet clinic. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and anxious pets. The veteran filled out paperwork with careful, blocky letters while the waitress kept the dog calm. It had started shivering the moment they walked in, pressing against her legs. Name? The receptionist asked. The veteran and waitress exchanged a glance. Buddy, they said simultaneously. The dog's ears perked up. Over eggs and coffee. The diner they chose was different than hers, brighter, busier, with a waitress who refilled coffee without being asked. Buddy sat proudly at their feet, now sporting a brand new red collar. The veteran stirred sugar into his cup. You gonna call your boss? She poked at her pancakes. Doubt it'd help. He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his wallet. Pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "Friend of mine owns a place near the VA," he said. "Always needs good workers." She turned the card over in her fingers. "Why are you doing this?" Buddy whined softly, nudging her knee. The veteran shrugged. "Everybody deserves a second chance." A ghost of a smile. Even surly waitresses. Epilogue, 3 months later. The new diner was louder than her old one, filled with boisterous veterans and harried nurses from the nearby hospital. The waitress, now assistant manager, balanced 3 plates with practiced ease. Near the window, the veteran sat with Buddy curled at his feet. He came every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordering the same thing. Today, he wasn't alone. Diaz and 2 others from the unit squeezed into the booth, arguing good-naturedly over the menu. As she approached with their coffee, Diaz grinned up at her. "Look who finally learned to smile at customers." The waitress flipped her off with one hand while expertly pouring with the other. The veteran hid his laugh in his coffee cup. Outside, the sun shone brightly on the sidewalk where a red leash lay coiled, waiting for its next adventure.